On page 10 of 21 you have the valve block. It says one's required, and what we're going to do is we're going to make what's called an ipart, or a configuration or a family table of this one part. And so we'll have the middle valve block, or part of the valve block, which is this part. This part actually attaches onto the head with these two countersink holes. We'll also have the intake, which will be on top, and the exhaust, which will be on bottom. So they have the same shape, they have the same hole pattern, but we're just going to use different kinds of holes and different features on there. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to name all my features. I don't really need to name the extrusion because the extrusion is going to be the same in all of them. Does that make sense? What we're going to do is we're going to suppress and resume features by not changing the features themselves. We're actually going to suppress the through holes, and we're going to resume another kind of hole. So I have to know the name of these, and I'm going to call this one matching, because this has to match the holes in the other two blocks. Does that make sense? I'm going to name it something that I can remember. And I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call this pass through mid, because we're not going to use this kind of hole in the exhaust and the intake. We're going to use a countersink hole because we're going to press fit a valve block into it. Okay? So I'm going to name that pass through mid. In this hole, I'm going to call this one through to head, because that's where all the gas and the air comes in, and then it goes into the head as we've assembled that on. And then this last hole, we're going to call this mount to head. And you can name these anything that you want, but just so you understand it. Now we're going to make this part a table-driven part by creating it as an ipart. And so what it's going to do is I'm actually going to go to, there are several ways that you can do this. You can do this through parameters, so you can change the diameters of holes in parts. So you could have a family table of number of screws with different lengths and different diameters. Properties, you can do it with different properties that you've associated. Suppression. So this is what we're going to do in this part. We're going to allow or suppress features. Right? So in this, I've got a member here and a part number. So I'm going to have three different rows down here. I'm going to have a middle, intake, and exhaust part. Okay. So the member, I'm going to call this middle. And if I had a part number associated, usually when you have family table parts or iparts, you'll have the same part number and a different dash number for every configuration of that part. Does that make sense? Because you're making it kind of the same way, it just has different configuration. So I'm just going to stay with that, and what I'm going to change is what I'm going to put over here. So I'm going to do that one, and I'm going to click out here. So it says you've changed it. Do you really want to? I'm going to insert another row, and I'm going to insert another row. Right here, I'm going to put intake in here. And then in the third one, I'm going to call it exhaust. Alright, I don't really care about part numbers right now. Later we could come back and associate those. But what I'm going to do I need for matching and a through hole to be either computed or suppressed in the other two? I don't want through holes in the other two parts, so I'm going to suppress these holes in the other two parts. So I'm going to go ahead and move that over to this side. Notice that it's computing in middle. I'm going to suppress it in these other two configurations. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, the next thing, pass through to mid. Which one is that one? That's this one. Alright, this one. Are we going to have the same configuration of a hole in the intake and exhaust? No, it's going to be a counter bore. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that one over to compute in this configuration and suppress in the others. Then I'm going to go in and put a counter bore, and I'm going to allow it in the others. You see where this is going? Alright, and through to head. Is that one in the other configurations? It's not. It only goes through from the middle. So I'm going to compute and suppress. And mount to head, that one is not in the other configurations either. It only mounts from the center block. So I'm going to allow that one to be over here too. So now I've got all these. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to suppress matching. Let's see if it'll take it. It allows S and C now. It used to make you type everything, and it used to make you have to have a capital letter. So thank goodness that we don't have to have that. So in all these, I'm just going to go ahead and put S in all these. It just copies everything from the first row. Okay, and I'm going to verify that and say OK. It's created a table up here now. And the table is where we're going to we'll be able to select any configuration that we want. Right now we're looking at middle. If I double click on intake, that's all that's in the intake right now. If I double click on exhaust, that should be the same for exhaust. So I'm going to go back to middle here, and I'm going to actually go to intake. I don't want any of these things in middle to be in my intake, so I'm going to double click on intake. Notice what it does. It actually suppresses those features in the model tree. Right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to this sketch and I'm going to make it visible again.